I'm here with Aileen Bassis, who has a work in coming show at Alfa Art Gallery entitled The Space Between. We want to go ahead and get started. I saw on your website that you say that your work is very content driven. So could you explain what these subjects are that?
I start out with subjects that interest me rather than, I'm going to start a painting or start a print or do drawings. I'm really looking at certain subjects that are engaging me, and they're usually social and political subjects. So I became very interested in issues around immigration several years ago, and that drove me to create a group of etchings, artist books, work that goes on the wall. So I've explored it in different mediums in different ways. And I've done work about the Holocaust. I've done work about Muslim identity in the U.S., different topics that engage me. So it's kind of like I'm filtering in the world and making art that speaks to it.
Whoa, I like that, filtering in the world. So what is kind of this process of filtering then? Like, how do you transfer these concepts into your artwork?
Well, I think about how to make images that are going to engage people, materials that will hold people's attention, something that'll have some kind of hook to it. And then I often use text in my work too in different ways. So it could be fragmented text, it could be a historical text. A couple of years ago, I know you asked about poetry. I took my first workshop in poetry because I was thinking about developing my own text for work rather than use just material from newspapers or history or other people's words, and that taken off and become its own thing. But I use text more and more in my work too.
That's great. And so you also, kind of your use of text, you do a lot of books and transfer prints, and with those and etchings, what kind of drew you to this specific media?
Well, there's couple of different media there.
All of these media, I guess. I guess printmaking would be the general.
Well, actually, I was a photographer for many years. I started doing photography right after I finished. As I was ending grad school, my husband at the time had a darkroom, so it was really easy for me to access that. And I got really interested in print manipulation and darkroom work, which I don't do anymore. I sold all my darkroom equipment with digital when digital became a thing. So that morphed into getting back to printmaking, which is something I did as an undergrad in college years and years ago. And I always loved it, that the ink, the textures, the whole process, the randomness of process, which I also was something I did with the way I did photography too, with print manipulation. But I like things that I can't always quite control. And then most recently, in the last 2 months or so, I've returned to drawing a lot. I've been doing a whole series of drawing about Black men getting killed by the police, and that's been engaging me.
Yeah, I also studied printmaking too. So I definitely really like you were saying, like kind of the moments that you can't really expect to happen, but then you see them whenever you're done with the process, and sometimes those can be like the most beautiful parts of the prints.
And that ink on paper, it has its own quality that nothing else kind of gets. So
that kind of like brings me right into the next question that I had, which was, you often present like photographs and different things through the process of printmaking. Why did you decide to move towards like the more laborious, like traditional techniques instead of just presenting everything as like digital prints?
It has a really different physicality to it, the prints as opposed to the photographs. A photo kind of sits on the paper, and the print interacts with the paper in a more visceral, physical way. And that kind of physicality interests me. I'm really interested in art that has to be seen in person. As much as we've been looking at all this art on screens, which is all we've been doing, though New York has opened its museums again, and so that's been wonderful to return to. But there's something about that physical encounter art that I think is really important to the way I work and the way I approach things. Not everybody does it that way, but I do.
That's great.
And I look at the photograph as just something that I can use to give a different meaning to the subject. So I work a lot with I only work with photos I've taken to make my prints. And a lot of them are just sort of random street pictures, but I'll give them a new meaning by the way I'm putting them together and what I do in Photoshop and the text and all that. So I'm not really interested in straight photography.
So why do you take these photos of the streets, and why do you only choose the photos you've taken?
Well, sometimes I have a big library, probably over 6,000 photos I've taken, hovering in the clouds somewhere. When I have a project that I'm doing, I'll go through my photos and look for things that work with it. And then I'll go out and also take more photos. So I actually brought a couple things here. We're in my home, not my studio, because as I said, my studio Wi-Fi is kind of wacky. So let's see. Yeah, you can see that.
Yeah.
So this is a street photo, and it's from a series I started doing in 2017 after the election, and I was kind of thrown for a loop. And so I started going through my backlog of street pictures and printing them in a way where this is printed on a nice drawing paper, used BFK. And there's a pencil text on each one of these. I've done, I think, something like 14 of them. And this says, each one is a question for America, like who will be America? And after I started doing this, I went down to where the Trump Tower was, and I took some more pictures. So some in the series have little bits of the Trump Tower and the police barricades around it. And I also, here's another one, Where Are You Going, America?
Yeah.
And I also worked with the similar images, and I made a very small edition of 5 artist books with hand pencil text. And those are all in public collections now, so I don't have any to show you. But that gives you some idea of the way I'm working. This is the most recent book I finished. Is it okay to talk about?
Yeah, would love to hear about this.
So there was a call out. So I don't know if this will get into the exhibit that I submitted it for, but someone else will take it for something. Call out for work about climate change. And that's a theme I've been thinking about a lot, and I've written some poetry about. And so I did this book, which again is using a New York street scene. And the title is Artifacts of the 21st Century. And that's an inkjet digital print. But then inside, there. So you could see it's a big accordion structure with paper lithographs, which are from my photographs. So it's all the same photograph, and it's different fragments of it. And then in between are these, let's see, can you see that? Yeah, the bits of the city along the water trapped in bottles, which is all composed in Photoshop. So I took a ferry ride one day, and I took a bunch of photos, and then I photographed bottles and put the pictures inside bottles, so they were kind of like these museum specimens. That's what I was going for, or something you'd find in a cabinet of curiosities. And the text is a list. So the text reads, when the oceans rise, will they find stop signs and traffic lights, brick and stone, playground swings and trash cans, metal shutters and doors, car doors and tires, strollers and bikes, window sills and glass, plastic, pipes, bags, and children's toys, parking meters, awnings and billboards, graffiti on a wall. So it's like thinking about a future time, you know, and all this detritus of our current civilization being just sort of remnants that people will be exploring and trying to make sense of.
Yeah.
I just finished that last week, so that's like hot off the artist press.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you presented it in a book, almost like this idea of these objects that we're used to always being around and like touching and seeing being gone, but then there's this book that remains. That's like
yeah, right. It's like this strange, yeah, like going through the museum halls and looking at the little piece of glass from, 1,000 years ago, kind of sum up some of that kind of feeling.
So would you be able to talk a little bit about your piece that's in the exhibition called Mortars Fired?
That's a photopolymer etching, which is something that I was only doing because I got a grant that paid for, that helped fund it. I was, rather than making the plates myself, which is really tedious. I don't know if you've ever done that.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of heliogravure and some of
so
that.
I got a grant just because I needed some to send out the plates and get them made for me. So I'm printing them myself, but I'm not making them. So I was able to compose it in Photoshop, get the plates made. And I have one. You're going to get a reflection though because it's under plexi. But let's see.
Oh, yeah.
That's not too bad. Yeah, and this one says it was time to leave when there were no jobs. Refugees a lot. Starting in 2018, I did a couple of artist books about refugees. I wrote some poetry about it. Thinking about at what point do people decide to, there were the Rohingya people being driven out of Myanmar. There were people drowning in the Mediterranean. This goes on and on and on. People that are so desperate that they risk their lives. They go to sea with, leaky dinghies with life jackets that don't keep them up. And so I was thinking, so it was like that whole topic. And this is I think this is the most refugees that there've ever been in the world right now. There's this huge wave of people that are displaced for one reason or another. And of course, climate change enters into that because that's also going to make a lot of places not habitable.
Of course.
Yeah, so I was thinking at what point do people decide this is it? We're going. And so I had a whole list of things. So it was when mortars fired. The first one I did was, it was time to leave when soldiers came. And I showed that to my grandson, who was 6 at the time. And I said, well, why do you think they say it's time to leave then? And he said, because the soldiers come and they kill everybody. Yeah, so I thought, oh, good. A 6-year-old gets it. Success. So I did this whole group of etchings. And then I also made it into a book. And the book is, Do You Stay? And on the back, Do You Leave?
Wow.
And this is going to be there's an organization called Long Island City Artists, and they're having an online exhibition. And they asked for this. They're going to put all the pages of this in an online exhibition that's supposed to go up around the middle of September. So I'll probably post a link to that once it goes up. So this is kind of working with some of the same images that are in the etchings. This is lithograph, and then these are all inkjet prints. So let's see.
Yeah.
Houses burn, when bombs fall. Leave or stay. Stay and leave. And this is more visual. When nowhere is safe, do you leave? When you have lost everything.
Yeah.
So it's continuing to explore that topic in another way. So an earlier book I did also on this topic was this one, Advice for Travelers. It's an accordion, so I'm going to spread it out. You can see some of it. So this is Advice for Travelers, and this is a limited edition. I did 8 of these, and a couple of them are in public collections now. And it's using a text that I had written as a poem, and then I decided to make it into a book. So the poem was published in something called, let's see, in this anthology, From Everywhere a Little. And these are different random pictures from different places that I just felt I could make work for this. So just streets, and these two men were men I saw, I think it was a picture I took in Italy, and then I combined it with a different background. And these little girls, I just thought really worked, and that's this book.
So what prompted you to kind of do books for some of them and then to have others as like just full prints?
Sometimes I just feel like, it starts out in one thing, and then I could do it a different way. It's like I'm not done with this yet, and I can turn it around and find another approach, which has a different sense to it and add something. Like The Time to Leave, I did all those etchings. One's in the show, and I just showed you one. And then I felt like, this would really also work great as a book. And so I did similar things with legs and places, but the text is different. I had a more sequential kind of text as opposed to the way I was using the text in the etchings.
So I guess the next question that I have is, we kind of talked about it a little bit about how you've been incorporating your own poetry into your works, but since you've kind of done that more recently, how has that like evolved the art that you've been making?
Well, it's made me comfortable with using my own text, because I feel like I know how to use language in a way that has its own function, if that makes sense to you. It's interesting trying to balance text and image. The first artist book I made using my own text, I found it interesting because people tended to engage with the image and not with the text. And I realized that image is so much more powerful, that people will see an image and they don't have to think about it. They react to it. Whereas a text doesn't engage in the same way. So it's interesting for me finding the balance where I want, like, do I dial down the imagery so people engage more with the text sometimes? So there's that push and pull between the two that I find interesting.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, I'll show you. I brought home a couple of books. So this is one I did about a year ago. And this is printed on a risograph machine. And it's using, the title is Minors in U.S. Custody, Wants and Needs. And at the bottom, Flores versus Spar, which was the court case from 2019 in the summer, where our government argued that children in U.S. custody didn't need things like soap. You remember that case?
I do.
So I have bits of that court case, and it's fragmented on the back. And then I was thinking about wants and needs, and I looked that up, and sociology says wants and needs. Wants are things you want. Needs are things you can't live without. But I thought a lot of these things that they call wants and not needs, like soap, like their parents, like feeling safe, are also needs. I mean, I'm a grandmother now, and I can't imagine one of my little grandkids being put in a cage and separated from their parents. So this book I wanted it to be it is a flip book, like those children's books that you can mix and match the pictures. So I wanted to have that childlike kind of feeling. And repeated through it is, do you want and do you need? And they have things like stroke your mother's hair, smell your father's skin, someone who listens when you speak. And then in the center, I have a facsimile of the court documents to kind of bring it home, what this is all about. Yeah, so this was from about a year ago.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, you have the text that you wrote about like the needs and the wants, and then you also have with that the text of the court document that, operates as text in kind of a different way.
Yeah, so a lot of my work is, a poet I took a workshop with said empathic personification. So I guess the putting myself in, or putting the viewer or the reader into somebody else's shoes a bit, is a big part of a lot of my work.
So like you kind of talked a little bit earlier about like the drawings that you've been working on recently about the black men being murdered in the US. And could you talk a little bit more about this work that you're working on?
I was thinking about the fragility of everybody, of everyone's body, and particularly how one title I thought of, one of the pieces, is the brown and black body is a battleground, because it just seems to be something continually at risk, something, that's never safe, that's a battleground. And I did some drawings, two of them are on a website that I have a link to on my website, that an artist named Patricia Dahlman put together, of artists reacting to COVID-19 and to the Black Lives Matter movement. But I don't have a lot of posts of these things yet, because this is all really new work. But I was really found it engrossing to return to drawing, which I haven't done a lot of in many years, but I really got involved in drawing these bodies, and I'm combining them with text about the body, either fragments of medical book texts about the larynx, the lungs, referring to breath, text about how long after George Floyd died, that 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I've used that in a couple of the drawings. And then now I'm doing some stuff using information on carotid restraint, drawn from police manuals. And I think I'm going to work with some of the diagrams of how that's supposed to be done, in contrast, incorporate those into the drawings. So it's a whole series I'm just starting.
Wow.
Keep me busy.
Yeah, and unfortunately there's a lot to work
with.
with.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and I've been thinking about doing a book of weapons, about weapons, the different ways that are being used to injure people, that are officially sanctioned.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of those too.
Yeah, I think that would work nice as a book piece, but I'm just in the thinking I have to think about something for a while usually before I start getting ideas about how to approach it, and whether I want it to be just drawings or whether I want to create some book pieces, and how I'm going to do it.
Wow, that's great. Well, good luck with all of your upcoming work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else that you want to talk about or touch on?
I also did a whole series a while ago about Muslims in America. There was something called the Al-Mutanabbi Street Project, which a poet in the Bay Area organized, where he put a call out to poets and artists to create books to send to Baghdad after this major bombing occurred on a street called Al-Mutanabbi Street. So it was where artists would gather, and poets and intellectuals and creative people, and that was destroyed. So we asked book artists to create 3 books, and so they could have 3 sets of these. And one is now housed at Indiana University, IUP, I don't know, one of the Heron Library, that's it. The Heron Library has one set, and one set, I don't know, might be still traveling, and one set went to, I think it's supposed to have gone to Baghdad. I don't know if it did. Anyway, so I created a book for that. And what I did was I interviewed a Muslim American friend I had and asked about how she feels, and used one sentence of what she said and translated it into Arabic and combined it in a book. And after I did that, I felt like this is a topic that I really want to explore more. So I did a group of these, like for instance, you can see that. So this is a double-sided accordion. It's all paper lithographs with some ink, and it's Muslim in America. And the quote I'm using that she gave me was, I teach them Arabic, but they forget, which is so common of all immigrant families, that their children quite often don't carry on the language. That's really common. I remember I had a Chinese friend some years ago, and his mother cried to me that she spoke to him she taught him, he didn't really learn Chinese, and she felt like she couldn't really communicate with her own son because of the language. So, and then I used pictures that were taken where they were rebuilding after the World Trade Center was destroyed. So I teach them Arabic, but they forget, and it's also in Arabic. And the other side of it, I don't know if this is coming through.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, so it's like this, and I wanted it to be sort of complicated structurally, like you have trouble kind of getting through it, like there's an insert and it's like, which way does it go? Because it's a complicated topic. So I wanted the structure to echo the subject.
Wow.
And I did several of these. Each one's a different person. These are unique artist books. Somehow books seem right for this topic as opposed to something that just sits on a wall. Originally, I started out doing, I did a couple of digital prints with mixed media, and then I decided, no, these really need to be books because they needed to be engaged with in a different way than do something that sits on the wall. I think that's something I like about books is they're very one-on-one.
Yeah, and you're obviously like thinking of different ways to present the books, like you were saying, with making it more complicated and, you know, the flip book that you had earlier. So I think that that's really interesting that you're not just being like, okay, this needs to be a book, but like then how can you change the way that you're presenting it as a book?
Yeah, thinking about how the viewer is going to enter into it. And that's something I also think about in poetry too, like how the reader enters into a poem and goes through it is something I think about a lot too, like going from here to there. The there isn't what they expected usually. That's one of the nice things about poetry. I really, it's been a nice discovery for me, discovering a whole nother creative area, which is writing.
That's really cool. And then like how you've been able to work it into the other areas that you've been doing with art.
Yeah, like even that book about artifacts of the 21st century, I spent a while thinking of that list and that each word was thought of, it wasn't random at all.
Wow. Well, it's been great talking to you and seeing all your work. Wish that this could have been in person. I could have seen your books and held them myself, but.
Well, if you come to New York City, I have a little studio in Long Island City, so come and visit when you feel like it. Wear a mask. But I welcome studio visits. So.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.